Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli, the computer guy, here to give you your daily dose of the roar. So basically, I scream about things going on in the technology world so I can fund a Silicon Dojo. Authorityless, gatekeeperless, free to end user hands-on technology education that empowers you to do whatever the hell it is you want to do in Durham, North Carolina. If you're interested in taking one of our in-person classes, you can go to silicondojo.com to see what our schedule is. Do remember, they're free to the end user classes, but free to the end user is not actually free. If you want to help support the project, there's a donor box link down below. And with that, you should be happy I'm in a hotel room right now. You should be happy I'm in a hotel room right now, or I would blow your fucking speakers up. I want to scream so much right now. So CloudFlare fucked the hell up yesterday. When CloudFlare fucked the hell up, I guess X went down in some areas, ChatGPT, OpenAI went down in some areas. Basically, it took a massive chunk of the internet down. And why did it go down? It appears because of a fucking fat finger. And I think this is interesting with all the problems that have been going on recently, right? There was the issue with the database issue with AWS a couple of weeks ago that took down a chunk of the internet. Now we have CloudFlare going down and taking down a chunk of the internet. And I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing is, the internet was fundamentally designed to be this massively distributed system. The concept was, right, if there was a nuclear war, that entire sections of the country could be glassed, and yet the communication systems would continue functioning, right? Because if you look at communications before the internet and before TCP/IP and all that kind of thing, basically it was point to point. If you look at telephone systems, right, you have these things called central offices. There's specific ways a communication gets routed to these central offices and then goes to you. So essentially, the idea is if a nuclear bomb, put a hole in your communications infrastructure, basically everything would go down. So the whole entire point of the internet, ARPANET and the rest of this crap, is to create this massively distributed system that would not be vulnerable to essentially single points of failure. And in the modern world of Silicon Valley big tech, what have they done? Created massive single points of failure. Because of course they have. So CloudFlare, if you have not used CloudFlare before, basically what this is a system for security and to basically stop denial of service attacks and that type of thing. Basically what you do is you put CloudFlare in front of your web apps and that type of deal. People actually hit CloudFlare first, and then they hit your web app. So CloudFlare does caching services, CloudFlare does firewall services, CloudFlare does a lot of things. Now, one of the things that I will say is I actually don't use CloudFlare many times for many projects because I've actually found it to be quirky as hell for a long time. And not to be snarky with them or whatever else, one of the things you always have to look at is the cost-benefit analysis of using any product or service. And one of the things that I've just found with CloudFlare over the years is it can just be quirky as fuck just to begin with. And so what they offer, for the most part, hasn't been valuable enough for me to put in front of particular projects. And so that's something to think about. The other thing to be thinking about too is, again, when you have these systems that can be single points of failure, are you using these types of systems because you need to use these types of systems, or are you using these types of systems because you should use these types of systems? And that's something to be considering. Again, especially with something like CloudFlare, is a lot of people use CloudFlare because they feel like they should, and the reality is it's simply another system that could fail. When you use CloudFlare, you are literally putting another vulnerability into your stack. And so the question is that vulnerability worth the vulnerabilities that CloudFlare mitigates? If you don't actually have vulnerabilities for CloudFlare to mitigate, then all you're doing is simply putting another vulnerability within your stack, and so you have to be careful about that. So anyways, yeah, CloudFlare, this is coming from CloudFlare themselves, which is almost worse. It's almost worse. You read this, like, Jesus. Jesus. You're admitting this? Holy shit. Holy shit. On 18th of November, 2025 at 11:20, Cloudflare's network began experiencing significant failures to deliver core network traffic. This showed up to internet users trying to access our customer sites as an error page indicating a failure within Cloudflare's network. And so I actually saw this yesterday. Many of the sites that I went to basically said a 500 error. So whenever you're looking at errors, 500 error is a server level error. So normally it get thrown out from like Nginx or Apache or IIS, that type of deal. The issue was not caused directly or indirectly by a cyber attack or malicious activity of any kind. Whew. Which makes all this so much worse. Instead, it was triggered by a change to one of our database system's permissions, which caused the database to output multiple entries into a feature file used by our bot management system. That feature file, in turn, doubled in size. The larger than expected feature file was then propagated to all machines that make up our network. So a change in their database system's permissions caused the database to output multiple entries into this file, and that got propagated to their systems. So literally, simply changing permissions within their database system. The software running on these machines to route traffic across our network reads this feature file to keep our bot management system up to date with ever-changing threats. The software had a limit on the size of the feature file that was below its doubled size. That caused the software to fail. So somebody apparently had hard-coded in how large this file should be. They fucked up their database, so their database created a file that was bigger than what it was supposed to be, and this went out to all of their systems. One of the things to be thinking about with cybersecurity and the rest of this is the question is if you were going to hard code in to their systems how big this file should be, why wasn't the file validated when it initially got created? Right, that's one of the big things. Again, we talk about things like data types and other things. If you're gonna hard code in what data can be inputted into systems, and if the data is wrong for some reason, it's gonna get kicked out, then you need to have validation processes along the way to verify that the data still looks more or less how it's supposed to look when it's going to be accessed by that end system. After we initially wrongly suspected the symptoms we were seeing were caused by a hyperscale DDoS attack, we correctly identified the core issue and were able to stop the propagation of the larger than expected feature file and replace it with an earlier version of the file. Again, what's interesting here is that this just wasn't an automatic system. Why did the file not get created? Why did it not get failed out during that creation process? That goes into their logs, their alerting system, and then they're just figuring out why the fuck that thing was too big. The curious thing is here, why did that actually propagate out at all? Core traffic was largely flowing as normal by 1430. So it took 3 hours. It took 3 hours for them to find and remedy this particular problem. We worked over the next few hours to mitigate increased load on various parts of our network as traffic rushed back online. That's another big problem that we're going to be seeing. We saw this with AWS. Is you have a failure in these systems. They start fixing the failure, but because now they're fixing the failure, there's more traffic coming in than there normally would be coming in, and sometimes you can then get your system shut down basically because of overloading them. As of 5:06, so 5 o'clock, 5.5 hours later, all systems at Cloudflare were functioning normal. Let's see. It shows a chart. The chart below shows the volume of 500 error HTTP status codes served by the Cloudflare network. Normally, this would be very low, and it was right up until the start of the outage. The volume prior to 11:20 is the expected baseline for 500 errors observed across our network. The spike and subsequent fluctuations show our system failing due to loading an incorrect feature file. With what's notable is that our system would then recover for a period. This was very unusual behavior for an internal error. So the issue here, and something to worry about, right? I talk about hard fails and I talk about soft fails. Hard fails are good. Hard fails are good because something goes down and it's just down, right? You unplug your server, right? Your server isn't going to respond to shit. Server is not responding to anything. That's a hard fail. Go figure out what happened. The problem you run into is what are called soft fails, and soft fails are, it's kind of working, kind of not working, maybe it's working, maybe it's not working, right? That can be a big bugger. And so what they're talking about here is that essentially the systems would fail. They would then self-recover. So they're essentially trying to do a self-healing process. So there were failures, but it wasn't completely failing. The explanation was that the file was being generated every 5 minutes by a query running on a ClickHouse database cluster, which was being gradually updated to improve permissions management. Bad data was only generated if the query ran on a part of the cluster which had been updated. As a result, every 5 minutes, there was a chance of either a good or a bad set of configuration files being generated and rapidly propagated across the network. So basically every 5 minutes, this task triggered. Depending on another set of events, when the task triggered, it might get a good set of configurations or a bad set of configurations, and when it got a bad set of configurations, everything went to hell. This fluctuation made it unclear what was happening as the entire system would recover, and then fail again as sometimes good, sometimes bad configuration files were distributed across our network. Initially, this led us to believe this might be caused by an attack. Eventually, every ClickHouse node was generating the bad configuration file, and the fluctuation stabilized in the failing state. So it's good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, 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 bad. And then basically everything kind of went to hell. And so that's CloudFlare. And that's the thing to be thinking about in this modern world as we start using things like infrastructure as a service. And as more and more people decide to use the exact same infrastructure as a service, right? If you're looking at CloudFlare, I think Akamai is another vendor for something that CloudFlare services do. But one of the big problems with CloudFlare is CloudFlare in the internet world, as much like Google is for the normal person world, is just CloudFlare, right? What happens when in order to maintain your systems, everybody starts using the same infrastructure as a services by the exact same vendor. And what happens when that vendor then does something asininely stupid and everything goes to hell, right? This is a massive, massive, massive problem. And as a problem we are starting to see more of. Again, it was only a couple of weeks ago that Amazon had a complete and utter clusterfuck. Microsoft Azure's, again, I'm just saying the data centers in the Netherlands. A data center in the Netherlands had a thermal event. No idea why that might have possibly happened. Anyways, that just happened a couple of weeks ago too. And we're starting to see more and more of these problems with these infrastructure as a service platforms. One of the things that I find fascinating right now in the 2025s is how little government oversight there seems to be. I mean, think about this. Even the United States, right? We're supposed to be hands off, theoretically. But we have a lot of oversight for a lot of industries, right? We have the USDA checking out our meat. We have all the bureaucracy to make sure trucks are safe for driving on the road. We have a lot of bureaucracy even in the United States. And one of the curious things that I find is that with these cloud providers, with these infrastructure providers in 2025, there still seems to be almost no government oversight. Where are the regulatory audits? Where are the people going to jail for failures? Where is anything to show us that these providers actually have to be up to snuff, right? I think that's one of my biggest concerns about all of this kind of stuff. If you go back to telephone systems, back when the government, actually regulated telephone systems, right? There was a lot of regulation for telephone systems to make sure that telephone systems did what the hell they're supposed to do. And that's one of the things to understand here is I'm not pushing for regulations and auditing for cutting edge technology, right? I'm not saying a new company or a new product comes out and all of a sudden there has to be all this regulatory burden. The question that I am coming to though is like when we're talking about the AWSs of the world, when we're talking about the Azures of the world, we're talking about the CloudFlares of the world, right? These are ubiquitous data systems that a massive chunk of our GDP relies on. And to realize there seems to be no government oversight of this kind of crap at all, I think that's one of the things that becomes very concerning. So one of the things, the takeaways with this, one of the big takeaways with this is if you're using Cloudflare, do you honestly need to use Cloudflare? Not even being snarky about Cloudflare, do remember every piece of functionality you put into a system is a vulnerability for that system. That's just how it is. That's just brass fucking tacks, however you feel about it, right? The other thing is if Cloudflare fails, again, do you have redundancy and do you have resiliency for IaaS? Right? Infrastructure as a service. So I think this is an interesting new question. So back in the day when we owned all of our own equipment, right? So you owned your own routers and your own servers and all of that was sitting in your data center or your server room, right? You would have what's called failover. So you may have your T1 line or whatever, your fiber line coming into your building. And then the idea was if somebody put a backhoe through your fiber line, which actually, the reason I always talk about that is that actually happened to me once. Anyway, somebody puts a backhoe through your fiber line. The idea is you might have like a DSL connection there or cable internet or something. It may not be as good as your fiber connection, but it is a connection. So your fiber line goes down, you fail over to this other networking connection to try to keep everything, basically up and running. We talked about Active Directory back in the day, basically with clustering. So when you have databases, you can cluster databases. Active Directory is basically a security type service for logging in and that type of deal. So what you do is you cluster your Active Directory servers for redundancy, right? So the idea is if the CPU fan in one of your servers fails and it gets kicked offline, the other servers within your cluster continue to function normally. Maybe it's a little bit slower or whatever else, but whatever, you'll get to it. When you get to it, it's just simply another work order. The entire company doesn't go down, simply a server within the cluster goes down. I think what's kind of getting to be more interesting now with infrastructure as a service is the idea is as companies went to infrastructure as a service, one of the things that they were doing is that they were buying redundancy. They were buying resiliency. Instead of me having to have multiple routers, multiple internet connections, multiple servers, and all that kind of stuff, I'm simply going to pay you. Part of what I'm paying you for is that you automatically do that for me. The problem is these systems are becoming so large, and in many ways they seem to be becoming so vulnerable. The fact of the matter is now you have to be looking at Cloudflare the way you used to look at your server, right? So if your server went down, what is the failover? Right? Your question now has to be, if Cloudflare goes down, what is your failover? And I think that's one of the big things to be thinking about now, again, with architecture and that type of thing. If Cloudflare goes down, and that's the thing too, think about it. Like, so Cloudflare was down, let's say for about 5 hours. 5 hours it was down in total. So if you're normally using Cloudflare as kind of that wall, that gate, I suppose, between you and the outside world because you're worried about denial of service attacks or whatever else, one of the things to ask yourself is how long would you be okay without that gate existing for the rest of your infrastructure? Can you simply have your DNS settings start to reroute just simply to your normal infrastructure for a 5-hour period? Do you really think there's going to be a massive DDoS attack during that period of time? And that's one of the things you're going to have to talk to your CEOs and executives about for things like failover, is like, what are they willing to pay for? So you pay, let's say, $1,000 a month for Cloudflare. So you're already paying $1,000 a month for Cloudflare. That's already an argument you had, right? So if you come up with a failover solution for if Cloudflare fails, one of the things is you could simply reroute to your normal IP addresses and everything will stay up and running. But then there's no security, right? That's the cheapest option, but there is a risk to that particular option. Is that what you're okay with? Is that what your executives are okay with? On the other hand, right, you go with a competitor, Akamai, I think it's Akamai or somebody like that. But here's the thing, that means you're paying $1,000 for Cloudflare a month, and you're paying maybe $1,000 for Akamai a month, maybe $500 a month for it, right? That's an additional charge per month you're going to be paying, even if there's no reason to use a service. And that's one of the things to talk about with your executives is how much are they willing to pay for resiliency? How much does 5 hours down actually cost the company? A lot of companies, 5 hours down is not going to be worth $12,000. There is no way, shape, or form 5 hours down of your systems is going to be worth $12,000. Other companies, right, they may be doing $12,000 in transactions every couple of minutes, right? So if they're down for 5 hours, That might be $1 million. And that's going to be something that you need to sit down with your executives and you need to start having real, actual conversations about this kind of stuff. Because again, I think it's always only going to get worse. The days of simply relying on one IaaS vendor and feeling like that is your security or your resiliency solution, I think it's basically going out the window. So anyways, what do you think about this? What do you think about Cloudflare fucking shitting the bed over a goddamn database permission issue? What do you think about Cloudflare's systems in 2025 are so fucking piss poor that when their database system started outputting, right, files that were too large for the end system to be able to deal with, that there was no validation process for that, and it was able to get all the way to the end system for that end system to fail? How fucking horrifying is that? How many days in jail? And that's the thing I'm going to start pushing for a lot of these quote unquote technology professionals. How many days in jail should they rot for that abject failure? Right? Because I think that's one of the big that's one of the big things in our field. No matter how badly you fail, no matter how badly you fuck up, no matter what level of gross negligence, right, you perform, no matter who gets hurt for how much money, there's this fucking idea that you're some goddamn Teflon geek, right? No. I don't get punished, right? There's never a reason for the technical staff to ever get punished for their abject failures. But anyways, that's my thought. What do you think? Put your thoughts down below. If you like these videos, give us a thumbs up. If you hate these videos, give us a thumbs down. Call me amazing. Call me a dumbass. Just be a real Lutnick and do it down there in the comment section. Do you remember I do these videos to fund SiliconDojo.com, authorityless, gatekeeperless, free to end-user hands-on technology education that empowers you to do whatever the hell it is you want to do in Durham, North Carolina. I'm doing a class tonight on AI and web scraping. I'll be doing a class in a couple of weeks on extending AI capabilities with REST APIs. We're going to be doing a class a couple of weeks after that on AI vision systems with something called Moondream. If you're interested in those classes, take a look at our schedule by going to Silicon Dojo. Do you remember free to end user is not actually free? That's why I'm sitting here roaring every day. If you'd like to throw some money into the donor box link, that would be ever so lovely. And with that, see y'all later.